Everybody say welcome.
Welcome.
Everybody say welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event titled Home Denied, Struggling Against Displacement from Chicago to Palestine. My name is Jorge Ortiz. It is my honor to facilitate tonight's event. I am a graduate student at the University of Illinois at Chicago and a member of Communities United Against Foreclosure and Eviction. Tonight, we are going to hear the testimonies of 6 individuals, one on video, 3 from Palestine and 3 from right here in Chicago. What we are hoping to achieve is to learn about the struggles, right, and make connections between 2 very different realities. Tonight's event is brought to you by the Chicago Movement for Palestinian Rights and the Chicago and Communities United Against Foreclosure and Eviction. We will begin tonight with 2 brief overviews, one of the U.S. housing crisis and a brief overview of the Palestinian struggle. So I'd like to start by providing an overview of the U.S. housing crisis. And the U.S. housing crisis has a very long and complicated history. But I'm going to very briefly provide a context for some of the stories that you're about to hear. And I want to begin at the time when we, as Communities United Against Foreclosure and Eviction, started organizing. We started organizing a number of years ago, right when the crisis began. And we started organizing because people were losing their homes. We started organizing out of necessity. And it was in the private market. A lot of people who are private homeowners, a lot of people in the middle class and working classes were losing their homes. But it's important to state that the housing crisis goes far beyond that, goes way back. This country, for decades now, at all levels of governments, are eradicating our public housing systems. And that is a struggle that has continued way before the crisis that we are experiencing today, the housing crisis we are experiencing today. And moreover, the housing situation in America is no better than it was during the time of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King, before his assassination, came to Chicago, and he spoke about the housing situation in this city. And he spoke about the racial and economic segregation that plague our American cities. And as we see today, our cities and our neighborhoods, our communities are no less segregated. But to return to the foreclosure crisis. So what happened was people who previously weren't able to afford a home, people who were denied access to the American dream, were all of a sudden being given these loans at no or little money down to be able to acquire a home. But these loans were essentially destined to fail. They were made so that people who got these loans weren't able to pay them back. So when we have a situation where tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of families are no longer able to pay their homes, what we eventually had was a bursting of the housing bubble. Now, it's much more complicated than this, but I'm just kind of laying out a context of where we are today. So our federal government subsequently bailed out the major banking and mortgage institutions, along with the automotive and airline industries. And 5 years after the bursting of this bubble, there is no end in sight to this crisis. And that is because this crisis that we are witnessing right now actually is part of a deeper crisis of American financial systems. It's part of a deeper trends in our society. And what we saw several decades ago was the beginning of a shift in the economy of this country, and it was characterized by massive unemployment. And what we see today in the United States is that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That is a reality. As CEOs and corporate executives give themselves more and more and higher wages, we are seeing a level of deunionization that we haven't seen in this country. We see the number of homeless people increase. Every day I see more and more homeless people on the trains and living on the streets. Last year, this government deported approximately 1,000 people per day. Deportations are another form of displacement in this country. Here in Chicago, particularly during the summer, the Cook County Sheriff's Department was evicting about 100 families, 100 people per day, just in Chicago alone, in Cook County alone. So what we are witnessing in this country is a massive displacement of poor and working people. And hopefully our stories that we will hear today will share light on some of those realities. So I'd like to introduce Anan, who is going to provide an overview of the Palestinian struggle.
Hello. Okay, so what I'm going to attempt to do is briefly, in about under 3 minutes, try to condense about 6 decades of history. Okay, so I'm going to use this map to help talk about what's been going on for the past 6 decades. Hopefully it'll provide some context for the stories that you'll be hearing for those that are a bit unfamiliar or not so familiar with the history. So what you see here, the first image panel is of 1946, and this was Palestine in 1946 under British control. Palestinians owned over 90% of the land. This is what it looked like before the Israeli occupation. And around this time, because of the atrocities of World War II, there have been an influx of Jewish immigrants to Palestine. And in 1947, the British mandate ends, and they don't know what to do to create a state for both Jews and Palestinians. So basically, they pass it off to the United Nations. And what the UN does is they create a partition plan. They give about 55% of the land to the Jewish people living there, and then about 45% of the land to the Palestinians living there. Palestinians comprise of more than half of the population at the time. So in 1948, Israel declares itself a state. War broke out. Over 500 Palestinian villages were demolished, and about a 3/4 Palestinian population was expelled. So you'll be hearing a little bit later today, but a lot of these Palestinians, they walked, and a lot of them ended up in the West Bank in refugee camps. Some were fortunate enough to stay in the West Bank. Others were forced to the outskirts, living in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. What you see in 1967 is similar to what happened in 1948. The state was divided into 3 parts. We have Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. In 1967, Israel and surrounding Arab nations went to war, and this resulted in the Israeli occupation of both the West Bank and Gaza. So now Israel has full control of 100% of the territory and the population. About a couple 100,000 more refugees happened. Some of them became refugees for a second time, being refugees from 1948, and once again, refugees from 1967. Many were pushed out of Palestine into the surrounding countries. Okay, so I'm going to just jump up to today. So you can look at the map. That's from 2010. You can see how much the Palestinian territory has shrunk. What were once Palestinian cities in Israel, most of them do not exist, or the names have been changed from their original Arabic names. The street names have been changed, village names have been changed, and Israeli cities have been built on top. The land you see in the West Bank that comprise of the Palestinian population, they're basically enclaves separated by roads, roads that are Israeli-only roads, so Palestinians cannot drive on them. There are separation barriers. There's a 2-foot-high concrete wall that also separates them. So Palestinians basically have no control of their borders or their movement or their homes. The Palestinians in Gaza, they're often bombarded by bombs and shelling. And the Palestinians in the West Bank, they're often separated from their land by these barriers. They have to go through checkpoints in order to move from one place to another. Sometimes they're denied entry into the neighboring city. It's also extremely hard for Palestinians to obtain a permit to build a home. And when they are built, they're often demolished. In various cities throughout the West Bank, Palestinian homes are destroyed and bulldozed. Yes, okay, so Israelis, I mean, basically they have privileges. They have access to water. They have access to roads that Palestinians do not have. They have access to building rights and building homes, settlements. I hope you get the picture. But I'm going to jump to today and talk about all the resistance that's been happening. Protests, campaigns. There's the boycott, divestment movement sanctions campaign that's going on to divest from companies that invest in the Israeli occupation and the colonialism and imperialist power that's occurring against the Palestinians. And there have been successful movements, not just in Palestine, but in the United States as well. And it's especially important in the United States because $3 billion of our tax dollars are going to fund military aid to sustain this colonialist project in Palestine. So I hope that somewhat provides a background and gives you more information that you can understand the personal stories that you'll be hearing a little bit later. Thank you. Just going to leave that here. Cool.
We are now about to watch a video, and it's about a gentleman named Mahmoud. Mahmoud lives in the South Hebron Hills, a rural area of the southern tip of the West Bank, Palestine. Palestinian residents of the area are under pressure to leave their homes due to violence from Israeli settlers and the Israeli army. In the year 2000, the Israeli army displaced the residents of several Palestinian villages in the area. All of their belongings were loaded onto trucks, their homes were demolished, and they were sent away. Within a year, the residents returned to their land and now continue to resist ethnic cleansing. Because of the severe building restrictions, many of these Palestinian residents live without electricity, in tents, and in caves. The Israeli army refers to this area of the West Bank as Firing Zone 918, and would like to see it cleared of Palestinian residents for the purpose of a military shooting range. This video interview was filmed in November 2012.
شو عم تسوي؟
مظبوط.
شو عم تسوي؟ شو انت بدك تسوي امام الجنود اللي مدججين بالاسلحه وبقنابل الغاز المسيل الدموع. حتى اهل البيت يعني بفضلوا البيت منه وبيبعدوهم عنه، واحيانا بهدوا البيت على اللي فيه. واحيانا كثير يعني صارت بهدوا البيت على اللي فيه. الوضع المفقرة سيء جدا للغاية، اللي هو سوء الوضع الموجود في المفقرة من بعد التهجير اللي حدث في المفقرة سنة 2000 وممارسات الاحتلال وضغط الاستيطان على منطقة المفقرة من سنة 2000 ورجاي لهذا اليوم. هدم البيوت، هدم أبارات المية، منع الطرق المؤدية إلى المفقرة، الربطات من تواني للمفقرة، من يطا للمفقرة. في 2005 بنينا مسجد من طين وحجر، فأعطونا اختار إله بس ما هدموه. أخذ معنا لسنة 2007. في 2007 قمنا جددنا المسجد ببلوك من برا طين وحجر بس من جوا بلوك، وعقدناه وظبطناه. قعد سنة بعدها 2008 أنا بنيت بيت 40 متر مربع. أنا عيلتي بتعد 14 نفر، وابني تزوج في 2004. وفي 2007 كان عنده بنات 2، فكانت العيلة يعني حاولت إني أسوي شيء جديد، ولكن إحنا الظروف تبعتنا الظروف المادية صعبة جدا. يعني الظروف المادية صعبة جدا للغاية، الأموال مش فيش معنا. ليش؟ الأسباب الأسباب لأن عندنا الأرض محل ما في مطر كثير. الطريق الثاني ضغط الإسرائيليين منعنا بتزويد بالتساريح العمل لإسرائيل. العمل الثالث هو يعني شيء عندنا صعب جدا. فبنيت البيت مع المسجد، أخذت اختار في 15/8 إلى 2008، وبعدها مشيت في الإجراءات اللي بتلزمه، يعني خارطة، إخراج قيد، كل اللوازم اللي بتلزم له. ولكن للأسف الشديد يعني احنا نتكلم ونتكلم لا يوجد عدل في إسرائيل. العدل لاتجاه واحد، العدل موجود اليوم للظالم على المظلوم، للقوي على الضعيف. في 2008 قدمت كل الأعمال هذه، ظلت لغاية 24/11/2011. يوم هيك الساعة 8:30 9 الجرافة الإسرائيلية بالقوات العسكرية بالمتاريس هدموا المسجد وهدموا بيتي، أخرى عرس 2 كان مجاورات إلي. كانت البنت واحدة من بناتي عمرها 22 سنة في الجامعة، إلها أغراض اللي هن كتب تبعت الجامعة والأشياء هذه، حاولت تطلعن فمنعوها الجيش، حتى أنهم ضربوها بالغاز مسيل الدموع. اعتقلوها لمدة 8 أيام. وقت الاعتقالات دفعونا مبالغ ومصاري كفلات وبهدلي. فبعدها يعني بعد هدم المسجد هذا والدار قمنا باللجان الشعبية وبالعمل الشعبي بإعادة بناء المسجد. فيوم 7/12 الساعة 6 الصبح المسجد مهدوم وجاهز، يعني من خوف التصوير يكون موجود أو الناس تكون موجود يعني، فهدموا هذا المسجد. المقاومة الشعبية في المفقرة، وليس هي المفقرة لوحدها، يعني تمتد من جميع جميع التجمعات التواني لغاية بالعين اللي كانت مشاركة في عودة حملة عودة الوجود. قمنا فيها السنة اللي فاتت في شهر 5. أولا بلشنا فيها ببناء 3 محلات للسكن في خربة مفقرة. فإن شاء الله إحنا مستعدين حتى نبني جميع المفقرة ونخرج الناس من باطن الأرض إلى ظاهرها، ومن الظلمات المغر إلى رؤية الشمس. فإحنا الآن بنقول إن شاء الله بمشيئة الله عز وجل وبالمقاومة الشعبية نرجع بناء المسجد وبناء البيوت اللي انهدت في القريب العاجل إن شاء الله.
Okay, we are going to continue the program with our stories. So I'd like to present at this time our storytellers. Our first speaker, and if you guys could come up as I call your names, will be Maria Dolores. Maria Dolores lives in Chicago. She is originally from Mexico City. And I've known Maria Dolores my whole life because she is my mother. Our second speaker will be Janine Weibach. I hope I said that right. Janine is originally from Palestine and currently lives in Chicago. Our third speaker will be Marlene Robinson Parsons. Marlene lives in my neighborhood in Rogers Park, right here in Chicago. Our fourth speaker, or storyteller, will be Youssef Arman. Youssef is a Palestinian American and lives right here in Chicago. Our fifth storyteller and final will be Sabrina Mori. Sabrina lives here in Chicago and is an organizer in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. So we are going to hear each of their stories for a few minutes, followed by a discussion among them. So our first speaker, Maria, can you tell us your story?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Maria Dolores Calvillo. I come from Mexico City. And when I was young, 15, 16 years old, I remember how my mom was fighting and working hard for having a house. And she is still living in. When I came to United States, I thought that, if we work hard and we continue good people, we can have a house and keep it forever. Since I moved to my home since 13 years ago, I have been having good relation with my neighbors, cleaning the streets, washing the garbage cans from the alleys, visiting my neighbors, and doing the best of good for me. But 4 years ago, financial groups told me that if I was having difficult and working hard to pay in my mortgage, it was an opportunity for me to get a modification. And I accept that. I paid $2,000, but as the time passed and they did anything, then I start receiving letters from the bank, in the Mac, saying that my house was in trouble and I was having the process of foreclosure. And I went to the court, and the judge told me, when I found that was a check from the financial group, the judge told me, you find another lawyer and send them to court. But the other lawyers asked me for $2,000 to help me in my problem. Then I found another lawyer, and they asked me for $4 more thousand to fix my case, but they didn't anything. Then I found that in the bank sold my house, and it was so hard for me to deal with this, because I never had this problem before by myself. But now my grandsons start asking me what happened, what's wrong, why the sheriff came to give you papers and tell us to move out. And I try to explain them that I can fix it and we can fight and stay in their homes. But my grandsons, they ask me, who's coming to kick us? Why? You work hard, and my uncles, and what happened? This is your home. We paint it, we clean it, we wash it. And I try to explain them that sometimes the power of the people, it's hard. How we can fight with us? It's hard. And I always tell them to do the best of them, to be honest, to study, to respect others. But when they start asking me things like, who's coming to kick us? The president, the army, the police? What we are going to do? We are going to sleep outside? And it's so sad. It's very, very painful. It's very painful because how I can tell them to stay, to don't go, to continue studying or doing good things or be a good boy. how I can talk. It's very hard. It's very hard for me. It's painful for me because I'm trying to do the best of me and to help others. But I don't receive any response from here, from the banks. But I find COAFE, the coalition, and they teach me how to defend my house, how to stay, how to talk, how to let them that I need my house and I stay and I'm not going out. And I'm thinking, maybe I can be arrested. I don't know, but I'm going to continue it, and I'm going to fight for my house, and I'm not going out. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us and taking the time to hear our stories. My name is Janine. I'm 24 years old. I'm Palestinian. I came to the States with my mother, my father, and my sister when I was about 7 years old. I wanted to say about Maria's story that the first time I heard it, she started talking about her grandchildren, her grandsons that lived with her in the house, and how she did not want to pass on this displacement and this feeling of where are we going to go, or what are we going to do, and are we going to sleep out in the streets? And it's funny because there's always this narrative around Palestine and Palestinian refugees about our grandparents, right? And like my grandparents, for example, my father is from a village called Sasa, which is in northern Palestine, now Israel proper, and my mother is from a village called Jenin, which is in the West Bank. And my grandparents, in 1948, their village was invaded by the Haganah, which is a Israeli militia, essentially, an IDF, Israeli Defense Forces group, attacked their village and they had to flee. My grandmother, her oldest son, and she was pregnant, and my grandfather all had to leave, essentially walking to Lebanon, where they camped, literally, in Nahr al-Barid refugee camp, which is in northern Lebanon near Tripoli, and have been there ever since. They died there, and my father's family lives there still. My father is here alone. And my mother's family in 1967 fled to Qatar, to Doha. And we have some relatives that still reside in Jenin. But about the grandparents, you grow up hearing these stories about how your grandparents left, and they still have the keys to their houses, and they left pots on the stove. They left, things at home, thinking they'll be back eventually. They have their deeds. And 64 years later, I'm telling you guys about dispossession and displacement. I was born in Nahr al-Barid refugee camp, visiting my grandparents, but I grew up in a camp called Yarmouk, which is in Syria, one of the largest Palestinian refugee camps. I have my earliest childhood memories there, and remember my grandparents' house. I remember my grandmother's taboon. A taboon is a wood-burning stove, and she had it on the roof of her house. And I would sit next to my aunts while they made fresh-baked bread and delicious things like that. It's hard to talk about, honestly. And as many times as I talk about it and rant and rave about Palestine, there's always this feeling of not belonging. So I was never to Palestine until May of 2011, and I hadn't gone back to the refugee camps till 2009 that I grew up in, where my family's at. Came here when I was 7 years old, so I'm not American. So there's always this feeling of displacement and not belonging anywhere. I went back in 2009 to visit my family in Nahr al-Barid refugee camp. But prior to that, in 2007, or 2006 actually, there was a war in Lebanon where the Israeli army invaded and destroyed Nahr al-Bared. They destroyed my grandfather's house, destroyed the taboon, killed my aunt while she was sleeping in my grandfather's house. And when I went back, it was kind of rubble. There were a few houses left. It was mostly gravel everywhere, kind of like a big soccer field. I wasn't even allowed to visit my grandparents' grave. It became a militarized zone. I had to give my passport every time I wanted to come in and out. And in 2011, when I decided to go back to Palestine for the first time in my entire family's history, in 64 years, I was interrogated for 8 hours, despite the fact that I had never been there. I was asked if I knew Rachel Corrie. I was called an activist. I was sworn to never enter the country again. My passport was confiscated. All of these things. And I kind of just want to leave you guys, the most important part of my story is that it's not my story. It's kind of the story of 6 million people. There are 6 million Palestinian refugees, 4 million of them still living within Israel proper. Most of them have been refugees over and over and over again. We were kind of lucky. We were able to come here. We were able to find housing, go to school, live our lives. A lot of people don't get that opportunity, and I witnessed that a lot while I was in Palestine. That's pretty much it for me. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marlene Robinson Parsons, and I consider it a privilege to be here to discuss my almost eviction, how I had to fight, and how I end up winning. Thank you. Well, I was born in Arkansas. I came and started school here at 5. I moved in Robert Taylor Project Home with my children. I had an opportunity through the leadership program to venture out and move up north. I was shown a 3-bedroom apartment with wall-to-wall, carpeting, central air, and all the little luxuries in 1983. And I took myself and my 3 children, and we moved. They started school up there. I moved in Rogers Park, north of Howard. They started school up there. The mistake that I made for my oldest son was, though he was an A student, he would cut classes. I didn't find out from the high school up there if they would accept him. So I transferred him out from south side up to the north side, Sullivan High School. But when they got up there and saw that, he cut a lot of classes, they would not accept him. He was over 16, going on 17. So that made him become a dropout, of high school. My daughters, they didn't have any problems. One daughter I had just graduated. She had just got accepted at Dunbar High School, but by the commute was so far, and I was on public aid at the time. I didn't have a job. Well, she decided to go to the high school up there. My daughter went to Gale School. My youngest daughter went to Gale School. I got a job. I was working on the south side. I had to commute from 7600 north to 7900 south, 79th and Western to work at a daycare. But everything turned out, and I met my husband up there. We got married. We was in a 1-bedroom apartment. Well, by then my kids had gotten older, and they were going on their own separate ways. And we were in a 1-bedroom apartment. Then he regained custody of his son in Michigan, so they put us in a 2-bedroom apartment. Everything was going fine. I never knew that they had a such thing called eviction court until one time we fell short, and we got behind in rent 2 months, 3 months, 2 months, and we had to go to eviction court. But we paid every penny, nickel, dime, quarter dollar that we owed. Okay, and then the economy started getting better, worse, and everything. So in a total, I've been in eviction court 3 times. And each time the judge would say, go work it out with the manager. You never stamp eviction on the paper. Go work it out with the manager. So this last time in eviction court, the manager, which is the property manager, Kimberly Boyd, she decided that she did not want my money. She wanted her unit, quote unquote, as she called it, her unit. She did not want my money. She gave me the runaround. I had a press conference in North Point. I had a press conference in front of the HUD building with Ed Hensenberger, director of HUD. I had we had a conference with, I think, which turned everything around was when Kimberly Boyd approached me on the street at 76th and Ashland with her security guard, and she wanted me to sign a paper stating that I would give her $4,400 and some dollars by Friday, and I told her she obviously had to be on dope and gumdrops as well, because I don't have that type of money. I mean, come on now, let's be for real. I don't have that type of money. She didn't want my $2,000, but then she had a security guard with her, so I turned to walk away from her, and she said that I was getting loud, and she was walking up on me, and I turned around and told her to get away from me because I didn't want to talk to her. Security guard, she getting all loud with me, so he's walking up behind me. He turns around, he's unbuckling his gun holster, and I'm like, oh my God, surprised I didn't faint on the street. But right away, I called Tony Hernandez of IDA, Illinois Housing Development Authority, and he scheduled a meeting for myself and other tenants that were facing similar problems. And it was then at that time that I got my interview with AIMCO. Yeah, AIMCO. And here I am telling the story. I know I left out a lot of pieces, but we did fight, and I did win, and I'm here. Oh, and I believe, to my knowledge, I heard that Kimberly Boyd was fired because she was under investigation for taking people money for renting them apartments.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yusuf. I'm a Palestinian, born and raised in Chicago on the Northwest Side. I'm recently married, and I actually live in the same apartment that I grew up in. So I'm dear to Chicago, and it'll forever remain a home to me in addition to Palestine. My story is a little similar to Janine's, but it's more present day. My father was born and raised in a small village 15 miles away from Jerusalem, and he lived there his entire life. During the 1948 displacement of Palestinians and in 1967, he was fortunate enough to not leave. His village was never touched. He stayed there his entire life. When he was 19 years old, he decided he wanted to pursue his education. He wanted to be a pharmacist, and there wasn't any medical schools at the time in Palestine. Palestinians couldn't go to Israel for education, so he had to leave the country. He was presented an opportunity to come to Chicago to live with his uncles, who were currently in Chicago, and he attended UIC and graduated from UIC's pharmacy school. At that time, the Israeli policy was, if you ever leave the country, you have to come back within a year, or your citizenship is revoked. So imagine a 19-year-old guy who lives on a small farmer village, barely had enough money to pay rent. He had to sell socks on the streets of Kedzie and Lawrence just to get by, affording an airplane ticket every year to go back to Palestine. It was virtually impossible. The first 3 years he was there, he did it. He did it, and he made an emphasis to go back to make sure he wouldn't lose his citizenship because that was so important to him. His 4th year, when he was going to graduate with an undergrad, he couldn't go for financial reasons. And when he came back his 5th year, they said, you no longer have Palestinian citizenship, and he entered the country as a tourist, just like any other American tourist would enter it. Born and raised there his entire life, ended up being a tourist after 1 year of not going back. So that's how my story begins. So my dad got married, came back, lived here. We're born and raised in Chicago. When I turned 12 years old, and it's a very similar situation with most of my relatives and people who live in similar villages. They don't want their kids to lose that sense of identity, sense of belonging and culture. So we have a habit of moving overseas when we get to those ages, usually around high school ages. So I was a freshman at Lane Tech, and we decided to move back to Palestine. Now, we knew that when we moved back, we didn't have any ID or any citizenship, so we were considered tourists, and every 3 months we would have to leave the country and come back to renew our visa. The visa was 3 months long. So every 3 months for 2 years, I would go to Jordan for 1 day, stay in a hotel, me and my mother, and we would come back. 1 week before finals junior year, I landed in Allenby Crossing, and it was the border crossing, and they asked me what was the reason of my visit, and I told them that I'm staying here for school and that I've been doing everything in the legal way. They, after questioning us for a few hours, they told both me and my mother that we are not welcomed into Israel and that we could never come back. And this was a week before finals. I had nothing in my bag. I just had the clothes that I was wearing and a passport. So we then didn't know what to do. We were frantic. We went to the embassy. The embassy said there was nothing they could do for us. So I told my mom, let's just try to go from another crossing. We have nothing to lose. We're not going to go to get in anyway, so let's give it a shot. 10 days later, we tried from another crossing, and we got in without any questions at all. So we were relieved, surprised, shocked. I mean, it was unbelievable. I got to finish my finals, my junior year, and then I headed home. And then we headed back to Chicago because we weren't sure if this was going to happen again, and it wasn't a stable situation for us. But living there for 2 years made me realize that Palestine is my home. It was always my home, and it will always be my home. The next year, after working a year here, I wanted to save up and go back and visit my grandmother back home. I saved up a ticket all year. I was working at Hero Sub Job, if any of you are familiar with it, making $6 an hour. I saved up my ticket. As soon as I landed in Tel Aviv's airport, they said, we told you last time you are not allowed in. You came in on a technicality and you have to leave. I wasn't questioned. I wasn't interrogated. As soon as I landed there, they arrested me, put me in Israeli airport jail until the next flight left to Madrid. I connected in Madrid, waiting with Spanish police. And then when my flight landed in O'Hare, CPD was waiting for me. And when I landed in O'Hare, they questioned me on one simple thing. They said, you went to Palestine yesterday, you had one bag, and you came back with 20 suitcases. How is that possible? And I had no idea. When I had landed, the Israeli government opened up my suitcase, opened up everything in my suitcase, and packed it in 20 small boxes and shipped the boxes back. All I had in there was a Vino for my grandma and VO5, things that they couldn't find over there, Halls, cough drops, Snickers, hot Cheetos for my cousins, things like that. They opened up every single piece of item, put it in boxes, and then they, sorry, I was going fast, and then they shipped it back, and that was the last time that I tried, and it's been 5 years since. And the story's longer and a little bit more intricate, but that's the gist of it, so thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Sabrina Murray, and I am 35 years old. I am a single mother of 2 children and been struggling in and out of homeless lists for the past 15 years. I faced eviction. I had this one instance where I was living in this apartment, and I was living there, and the sheriffs came, and they were pounding on the door. and I wouldn't open the door for them. So finally, they came in, they drew their guns. They were like, everybody got to get out. And me, I'm a little of a hothead, so I started yelling and screaming at them, telling them, why are they bothering me? Why don't they get the hell away from me, get out of my house, so on, so on. So finally, I'm running through the house, grabbing my stuff. They have their guns out. They're ready to everybody's IDs. They make me leave. They didn't even want to let me take my stuff, so finally, the landlord's daughter let me take my stuff out. And then I ended up moving in with my sister. And I was living with my sister, Sandra, and she ended up moving out to Pontiac and left me the apartment. Where there I found out that the house was in foreclosure. And I was like, oh my God, not again. I'm going to end up having to get out of this house. So finally one day I'm looking out my window, and there's a whole bunch of press in front of my home. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I go downstairs, and they were doing a press conference to save the home. So one of the members of Communities United came up to me and was like, would you talk on behalf of the owner? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But finally, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to be on TV, so yeah, I'll do it. So I talk on TV for them, and from there I started organizing, getting involved with the group, doing that. And then at the end, we started having problems, me and the landlord. So I ended up leaving when one day one of the people from the group came up to me and asked me if I would be interested in doing a housing occupation. So I'm like, what is an occupation? They were like, when you move into a foreclosed property. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. They were like, you don't have to pay no rent, you just have to pay your bills. So I'm like, I could do that. So a couple days later, I start going out looking for houses, and I found one. So I found one, and I ended up moving in with me, my 2 children. I had custody of my brother's 2 sons at the time, and my sister, Samantha, who had 2 kids and one on the way, and now she has another one. So we all moved into this house, and we lived in this house. We lived in there for 10 months, and finally the bank started coming, knocking on the door, harassing me, telling me I had to get out, so on and so on. Then one day I look in the mailbox, and I have this letter from the CPD, the famous CPD. And they told me that I had a trespassing charge. I'm like, okay, they didn't come and arrest me, so what is this? And I go to court, and I fought it to the end. And I stayed into the house for 10 months, and we fought, and we fought, and we stayed there. One of my most favorite memories of being in that house was we had this Hanukkah celebration where Rabbi Malcolm came to my house, and we went through this whole Hanukkah celebration. It was awesome. And Mike Flannery came and interviewed me and got my story out on the air. I really enjoyed that day. That was a really great day. And thanks to Communities United Against Foreclosure, they helped me through everything. When I had to get out and I had my trespassing charge, they moved me, and they helped me find another house. And now today I'm still sitting in that house occupying. And I'm going to keep occupying and standing up for the people who are like me, who can't afford to have a house or any place to live. And I'm going to keep doing this and helping other people to do this. Thank you.
That was very powerful. Thank you. So now I'm going to ask them a set of questions, and I hope to spark some discussion amongst the storytellers. I'd like to begin by asking you, so you guys talked about some of the horrible things happening in Palestine, and many Americans do not know about the devastations of war, right? This country goes out and invades other countries and occupies other countries, but we don't see that here. We watch it on TV, but we don't live it. But before we talk about Palestine, a lot of people also don't know about the poverty that exists here in this country, right? So I'd like for you guys to begin the conversation talking about poverty. Sabrina, you mentioned you've been homeless, and some of the other struggles that you guys have gone through. Talk about poverty in America and how it affects families and how hard it is to achieve the American dream.
Poverty is a hard thing because in our poor communities in the city, there are no resources for anybody to get housing, for education, healthcare, and all these issues, and they make it so hard for us. The poor stay poor and the rich get rich, and that's just how it is in this world.
Poverty and pertains to Palestine, for example, people have their homes demolished over and over again, saying, you don't have a permit to build here, for example. And then they apply for a permit and get denied because they're Palestinian, despite the fact that they've been living in that house for 50 years or what have you. It takes I don't know if anybody's ever tried to build a house or know the cost of brick and cement and, furniture and things of that nature. Because when a home is demolished, they don't come in and move your stuff and we'll come by next week and demolish your house. It's kind of like they wake you up at 4 a.m. with a bulldozer and an army and are just like, it's time for you to go. So grab what you can hold in your 2 hands and get out. And so you're forced into poverty if you weren't poor before. And, after building your house 2 or 3 times, you probably lose most of what you had to begin with. And so it's in a similar sense. It's like, people asking for large sums of money or for something that's nearly impossible. Go get a land permit and you can't have it. Or get me $4,500 by Friday or you're out on the street. Those 2 things are very similar. And if you weren't impoverished before, you more than likely will be afterwards. So.
Yes. Well, one thing related to poverty is the issue of jobs, right? And without jobs, there's very little of a means to move out of poverty. So talk about unemployment, both here and in Palestine. What do Palestinians do for employment? How do they get the resources that they need for their families?
I can't speak on behalf of all Palestinians, but I know as a refugee from Lebanon, from Nahr al-Bared, where the refugee camp is, Palestinians in Lebanon are not issued work permits, are not actually allowed to hold jobs, and thus are forced to do any kind of hand labor in terms of like building or driving taxis if you can afford a car, these kinds of things. So you're literally, it's against the law for a Palestinian to have a job in Lebanon as a refugee.
Employment in Chicago or in any state is if you have a job, you're really truly blessed. But if you're living in HUD housing or low-income housing and you have a job, if you get $1 raise on your job, your rent is going to go up. I watched over the years, my husband was the breadwinner, and I watched our rent go from $400 to $900 for a 2-bedroom, but this was supposed to be low-income HUD housing. But, at the end of each year, he would get a raise on his job, and that's how the rent would go up and up and up and up. And, the good thing about the low-income housing is if your income goes down, they have to adjust your rent to your income. And that's the good thing about the low-income housing. But if your rent goes up, it's like we're paying almost $1,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Pros and cons of having a job.
I think the occupation of Palestine goes hand in hand with all the jobs of people that are living there currently. A lot of people even live off of the occupation because there isn't any other opportunity. For example, Palestinian cars, they have green license plates as opposed to Israeli cars have yellow. Israeli cars can only drive on certain roads, usually the main highways with paved roads, and Palestinians take back roads that are filled with dirt and sometimes lead to dead ends. So there are some people that are living in Palestine that have only an American citizen. For example, like the way I was living, they were getting by taking people in their car and taking them to places that their car with a yellow license plate can take them versus a green. So the job situation, it's dire there. It is. It's like having a middleman in any of your businesses. If they ever want to import goods, if they ever want, let's say there's a wholesaler like like a party supply wholesaler. They can't go directly to China, for example, import goods and bring them into the country. They have to go through Israel. All imports and exports go through the occupier. So it raises prices, and it affects everyone's jobs.
Well, you kind of touched a little bit on my next question was who benefits from the displacement of people here in Chicago, who benefits from poverty, and who benefits from the displacement of Palestinians?
In Chicago, it's the Cook County sheriffs, the bankers, and the people in the higher seats, the CEOs of these banks who get our money, and they go on vacations and have beautiful homes while we sit here and don't have a place to live. So those are the ones, the bankers and the CEOs.
Who benefits similarly. It's a cash profit occupation. I mean, the wars cost money, and people have to make airplanes, and people have to make bombs, and people have to make guns and bullets and things that are necessary to occupy a country. People have to make security cameras on checkpoints, and people need tanks, and people need all of these things. So, for example, I know Anan earlier said that we pay in America about $3 billion a year to just the military force in Israel, for example. The wall, I think she said it was like 2 feet tall, but it's actually more like 10 meters tall. The wall, the apartheid wall, all that concrete has to be made somewhere. And the funny thing about it, we hear about this wall going up between Mexico and the United States, this border wall. And a lot of the times it's people of color, it's Mexicans actually having to put it up, as no option than to build the fence around them, right? And in a lot of cases in Palestine, people are forced to build the occupation around them. They're forced to build the wall, lay the concrete for it, the foundations for it, or help aid in building settlements that are taking over their land because they don't have the option. You cannot, for example, as a Palestinian, go to the Hebrew University. It's very, very difficult for you to it's actually impossible for you to become a doctor or a lawyer in Israel as a Palestinian. It's literally impossible. And all of these kinds of things. So you're forced, to build your occupation, and the people that benefit are the people that benefit off any war or any displacement, really. It's militarization, it's a war machine, war profiteering. And political gain at the end of the day, right? So that's who benefits.
It benefits to people who already have benefits, and we continue with having anything. How, as me as a teacher, how we teach the children to don't be the same, to don't do the wrong thing that adults do. It's hard. I deal every day with children, teaching them to don't do the same things. But anyway, people have and wants to have and still having more. And anyway, we are in the way to fight, and we're still learning how bad is the world around us. The power continued, and doesn't matter how they torture people, they kill people, they displace people from one place to another. And it's growing. It's growing. I see children learning to have more, to enjoy people who has power, and to have more and more and more. I see that its continual benefits the same people. The rich people, the powerful people, banks, governments. It's very hard.
We want to talk a little bit again, if you guys could talk about the effects of the struggle on children and women and children, right? In this country, about half of Latinos, for example, drop out of high school before completing high school. Can you talk about those limits of education, why we have limits on education?
like me from personally, I don't have a lot of education, and how it affects me and like other people in the community is we can't get a job. The only job we could get is at Burger King and McDonald's, and that don't even pay you enough to pay your rent. So how are you supposed to live off of a job like that? So it really, really affects us women, because us women are the ones who carry the burden for all. We have the children, we got to take the children with us, and it's really, really hard for us. And it really affects the children because they got to go to school. They got to live this life, and it's really hard for us.
Again, pushing a point across, but it all gets tied with the occupation in Palestine. When I was there, I would see kids who are 12 and 13 years old who are working on their father's farms and they're done with school because they have to help out their parents. The occupation forces you to change your priorities. I mean, my father was lucky enough to come here and to get a degree. A lot of his other relatives who did come here also, they weren't fortunate enough. They had to support a family back home and a new family here. So I think it's essential it's the cause, the problem of everything is the occupation. And especially when it comes to kids and their education, I think although maybe me and Janine were privileged enough to have a chance to get a degree, a lot of our parents weren't, and it was due to the occupation.
Regarding education, and like I live north of Howard, and the younger kids starting from, I'll say like 12, 13, 14, and 15, north of Howard is known for pharmaceutical sales. Hey, everyone, I'm quite sure, know what pharmaceutical sales is. So the older people that would do the time in jail, they would employ the younger people that, hey, I will give you $50 a day if you do this, that, and the other. And at one point in time, we formed an organization in a group, and we got a proposal written that, if you guys want to do these things, that's fine, but leave our 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids alone and let them get an education and let them grow up and decide for themselves, if this is the line of work that they want to do. But as I say, north of Howard, it was like 80% single female households. And it's kind of rough when you have 4, 5, 6 kids and you're on a fixed income, and they're looking at all of their other little friends with the new Nikes, the new Jordans, and all of these things on, and they're looking at these other drug dealers offering them an opportunity, which I never saw it as an opportunity, because yes, I was the first one. Yes, we did get a proposal written, and we worked with the 24th district that we would ensure the kids' safety. We formed an organization called Parent Patrol, and we made sure that the kids north of Howard got into school, got out of school, but then it was up to the parents. But then, hey, what can I say? If it's a single household and the parent is looking at, okay, well, this is going to put a meal on the table for us, then yes, one of her kids are going to be out there, doing what it is. And then as the kids are growing up older and older and older, they're thinking that, hey, I'm looking at this person getting up, going out, going to work every day, and they're still in a down position, whereas I've been doing this for, X amount of years, and I'm making, I'm getting $50 a day or something, and so I may as well go into business for myself, and there it is.
Regarding how things affect children, when I went to Palestine in 2011, I went to a village in Jerusalem called Silwan, and Silwan is a village that has a high rate of home demolitions. And I met a family, and they have a 10-year-old son named Muslim, and you're 10 years old, you're in 5th grade. And every week, the army with a jeep and military personnel comes to their house and arrests Muslim, claiming that he throws rocks or that he's partaking in demonstrations or whatever it is. And they arrest him, they hold him for X amount of days or the entire day or a week on occasion in confinement, in jail at 10 years old. He misses school. He doesn't get to see his parents. He's in a jail with adults. And it's for no apparent reason other than it so happens that they want to demolish this family's home, and they refuse to leave. And so it hasn't worked threatening them, but, you know, if you guys are parents out there, could you imagine someone coming to take your child in the middle of the night? How terrifying that would be for you and your family. And it's a scare tactic. We're trying to get you out of this house, whether, you know, however we so choose. Eventually it's going to be probably bulldozing the home on top of you, which has happened on occasion. I'm sorry? It is harassment, yes, it's exactly it. They harass them through their children. I mean, it's not even arresting the father, which happens all the time. It's arresting a 10-year-old little boy. There's also like famous pictures of Palestine. You can Google Palestine and you see schoolgirls having school at checkpoints, for example. They put up random checkpoints wherever they so choose. If that's on your way to school, so be it. And their form of resistance that these girls had, it's a very famous picture of these young girls sitting at the checkpoint, is they refused to not go to school. So they met their teacher at the checkpoint as far as they could get and had school there. For me, as a child that was born in refugee camps and has lived with this like internalized feeling of displacement, it's just like you never feel quite at home anywhere, you know. It's kind of played out in my life, and I move around a lot. I can never feel settled in one place. It's very normal to have bags packed, you know, and you don't feel quite American. I'm Arab American, I'm Palestinian American, so I'm always hyphenated. I'm never just American. I'm not Palestinian enough for a lot of people. I'm not Lebanese, so I can't have a Lebanese passport because I'm Palestinian. I'm not Syrian, so it's just like, who the hell am I? You know, or like, what am I doing, or where am I going, or where should I live? And can I call this place home? Is this home, or should I claim a refugee camp as home? And, you know, the people that I talk to and the people that have gone through similar experiences feel the same way. You know, when we talk about Palestine, it's always the discourse is like, oh, we're going back home or wherever. And it's just like, I guess that, you know, that is home. This is like this romanticized, very strong, powerful feeling of home, you know, that I share with my father, who's never been back, with my, you know, aunts and uncles who haven't been able to go back. But like, is my house my home? You know, like, this is something that you're forced to internalize. You're forced to swallow this kind of hard pill that you don't really belong anywhere, and yeah, you don't really have a right to belong anywhere. You're kind of a guest everywhere all the time. So I know that as my personal experience of being a child of, you know, diaspora and dispossession.
Thank you for sharing. This notion of not belonging is not uncommon to many Americans. But I have a million other questions, but let's get to the struggle, right? How are you guys struggling? How are Palestinians here in Chicago struggling for Palestinian rights?
Existence is resistance. The fact that I claim to be Palestinian to this day, despite the fact that everybody and everything in every history book I've ever read, most of the maps that I've looked at, do not claim of a place called Palestine. And I'm still Palestinian. So at the end of the day, being here in itself is an act of resistance. The fact that despite 8 hours of interrogation, you choose to go back and sit through it and be harassed on a regular basis because I want to go back. The fact that I'm sitting here with you guys, and you guys are listening, and I'm sharing a story is an act of resistance. Protesting is resistance. Lots of things are resistance. But the most important thing is existing and moving forward and fighting and holding ground, really.
I agree with all that, obviously. I think another, to piggyback off how when Janine was interrogated, same thing with me. I was evicted, I was deported and sent back on an airplane by myself, and I was a minor at the time. I was only 16. But that will never deter me from going back. And I have, since that day, I have been planning on going back, been saving up to go back, saving up to talk to an attorney to figure out how I can go back. But that's kind of like the scare tactic with the child and arresting them. It's similar with Palestinians in the diaspora, Palestinians that are abroad. They don't want you to recollect anything related to Palestine. They want you to forget it. They want you to never speak of it, and they want you to conform. And just a quick story I'd like to share. Like there's a lot of Palestinians that are like me and Janine, where we're active and we have an understanding of where we came from, and although we don't have a home, we know where we came from. There's a lot of Palestinians who conformed. There's a huge majority of Palestinians living in Jordan who say, oh yeah, my grandfather was a Palestinian, or my mother or my father was a Palestinian. And that's the tactic that they want to see succeed, is that Palestine was this story, it was this place years ago before all of this happened. And I think that's the most important thing, is to make sure that the message doesn't die. And I think dialogue like this with people who might not be as familiar with Palestine is essential to make sure that everyone understands what's going on with the cause.
Great. Sabrina, you mentioned the word occupation, and the word occupation means something very different when speaking about Palestine and to something that you're doing. You transform the word into something that means liberation. Can you talk about?
Well, an occupation is when you take over a foreclosed home, but in my terminology, I like to call it a liberation, and that's when you take back the homes from the bank and give it to a family who can't afford it, and they keep living there.
Maria, can you talk about the struggle? How have you managed to find the strength to stay in your home? And what's happening with your case?
In my case, how I struggle? Well, learning, listening, be united with other groups like CUAFE, like Anti-Eviction. And I struggle like this way, to see what happened, to see the response of the banks, to see other cases, other great stories that they are sharing with us. And, well, the key is to be united and resisting still in my house, telling the children that they need to be with us, to don't be scared. That's the way that I want to continue it until I struggle with this. It's not my problem, but to fight with banks.
Great. We have time for maybe one more question and a few responses, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions or comments. But one question I wanted to ask was, what would you like to tell the government or the government to do? But I'm not going to ask that, because they can't do anything anyways. No, what I want to ask is, how can we convince other Americans, right? We're here in the United States. Many of us aren't informed or are ignorant on many of the issues that we are discussing. What's one way that we can spread the message, spread the word of struggle and resistance?
See for yourself. Really, I mean, I've had a lot of people, like I've had, for example, former Zionists. I say former because they would come up to me and want to argue automatically as soon as they knew I was Palestinian. It was like ready to have this conversation, and I'm just like, listen, we're close enough right now when I was studying abroad that you can take a very short bus ride and go see for yourself and come back, and then I'm more than willing to have that conversation with you. And so when they'd come back, they'd be like, we don't need to have a conversation anymore. You know what I mean? There's nothing to talk about. It's very plain and obvious. Or really just read. Talk to somebody. Read. Read is something I suggest everybody does anyway.
Suggestive authors, maybe?
Suggestive authors. Oh, man. There's so many. Depends on what you want to talk about. I mean, there's a lot of fiction. There's Ghassan Kanafani, who is a very famous Palestinian author, and he writes fiction, but, you know, he has amazing stories about what it means to be a refugee, what it means to be a Palestinian. I would start there. I'm not going to give too many authors. I think that's a good place. Read Men in the Sun. Read a lot of these kinds of stories. Short. They're pretty short. They're quick, to the point. Read news. And don't read, like, CNN news. Never, ever read CNN news. Find alternate news sources. Talk to people that know. Talk to anybody. Figure it out. It's really not complicated.
How do you say? Don't be, or feel that you should be ashamed to talk to someone about what's happening in your life, because at one point in my life, no one, not even my children, and my children are grown, knew what I was going through, knew that I was facing eviction or anything. And I remembered a friend of a lady friend, and she went through the same thing. And we were at a meeting one night, and we left there at 7:00, and we were on our way home. And she made a U-turn, and she took me to this place on Ridge. And introduced me to these people, Communities United Against Foreclosures and Evictions. And within 3 weeks, I mean, my whole lifestyle and everything turned around. I got the help I need. Oh my God, it's just that I never knew, you know, so many people care about your feelings, what you're going through, and what you would have to lose. Because I have my great niece. She's 4 now, but I've had her since she was 2 years old. She saw her little sister drown in the bathtub. And I'm going to this lady, pleading and begging and crying to her to let me keep this apartment, because if I lose my apartment, this baby goes back to the state. This baby goes to the state. I went in and interceded and kept her from going to the state. And I've had her ever since. And the people at Communities United, they were closed for that day. They were closing out. And because their meetings, I believe they were closed at 7:00. And she did this U-turn. And she took me over there and introduced me to them. And I met so many great, wonderful people who are out there willing to help you. Like they say, a closed mouth don't get fed. You know, everyone is now that I'm becoming more actively involved in doing things, you know, I find that I'm not the only person that's going through this. And I don't have to go through these things alone. There are people out there that are willing and anxious and ready to help you. They help you, you know, they find transportation to get you from A to point B. They find childcare to get you from A to point B, you know, and it's just that you just have to open up your mouth. You have to open up your mouth and not be ashamed and not be afraid that, you know, everyone is going to close their door in your face.
I'm not going to top that, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah, I was just, the final question was, what are we doing for the struggle? What would you like to tell everybody to continue the struggle? How would you like everybody to struggle?
How I do, I go canvassing, I get the word out, I do events, I talk to every person that I can to let them know their rights, their renters' rights, their housing rights, and every other rights they need to know that I know of, against the police, against anybody. Just going out and talking to people is the way to do it.
I'd like to open it up for questions or comments from the audience. We'll keep it to very briefly.
I know a lot about Israel, Palestine. I've been activist for a long time, and the Jewish Voice for Peace. And actually, there used to be a temple here. It's called the Kom Shalom. The reason why I mentioned it, the rabbi, very progressive, he went to Israel. He said the Palestinians in Israel proper are not even second-class citizens. And it really hit me. I mean, I think I knew it, but he would put it in words. But you're very touching, all your stories, and I admire your courage. And I'm an organizer, and I'll help you.
Can I just say one thing about that?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off.
No.
Just a quick example. I have family members who live in a village outside of Jerusalem. If they have a wall, let's say a kid punches through a wall and the drywall comes down, they need to get a permit to fix the drywall. Like, they can't just fix it on their own. And if the Israeli government finds out they fixed it on their own, that's their legitimate reason to come and bulldoze the house down. So that's what he means when it's not even second-class citizen. If you leave the vicinity of where you live for more than 6 months, your citizenship is revoked also. So it's almost unbearable, but the people stay. They'll never leave. And that's the beauty of the Palestinian people.
It sounds almost like slavery.
Modern day. Yeah.
Yes. Other questions or comments, gentlemen?
You guys ever heard of Kosovo, the place Kosovo?
Yeah. Newest state.
Thank you. We have the exact same issue that Palestine has right now. Been occupied by the Ottoman Empire, then the Serbs and whatnot. I'm telling you one thing, if you guys stick with it, it's going to eventually happen. I'm serious. 2 million people live in my country. It's such an insignificant piece of land to everybody else. It wasn't to Bill Clinton, it wasn't to the activists that came from America over there and, tried to help us out. They saw what's going on. So as long as you stick with it, as long as you keep working at it, not just get upset over it, say, hey, you know what, this is over, nobody's doing anything else.
We've been sticking with it for 64 years, I think. We'll stick around.
It is going to be longer than that because I didn't live in my whole life in Kosovo. I lived in Kosovo. I live in America, first of all, for 5 years. I moved here 5 years ago. Literally had no idea what's going on in Chicago or anything. I lived in Germany before that because of hardship. My parents, my dad was a mechanical engineer, also a political figure back then, and it was a little bit impossible for him to live there in 89, 90. So we had to move to Germany. We moved to Germany for about 11 years. Germany said, you know what? Kosovo doesn't seem too bad right now. War is over. Send us back. We lived in Kosovo for 4.5 years, 5 years. It's a whole different world. Once everything is settled, Palestine it's going to happen. I guarantee there's enough people out there that are fighting for it. It doesn't seem like it, but there's enough people out there. I have a lot of Palestinian friends from Missouri, from around here, and we connect. I share my stories with them. They share their stories with us. So as long as you guys hang in there, it's going to happen. I guarantee you that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
I just want to second that by saying that this was already mentioned, but our government supports the Israeli occupation. It's really not every situation is different, and so I think that one big thing that we can do here is organize against that to petition our own government to stop supporting Israel, sending $3 billion every year of our tax dollars to support that occupation. That's probably one of the biggest things here to support that.
Any responses to?
I agree, and also join the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement.
Can you talk about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, please?
Yeah, briefly, BDS, it was a strategy that boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a strategy that was used by South Africa to end apartheid there. It's a strategy currently used by Palestinians and Palestinian allies. There's a cultural boycott, which means I, as a professor, I, as a performer, I, as a human being, will not engage within the occupied territories. I will not go to the Hebrew University and give a lecture about, whatever it might be, XYZ. I will not, also it means not buying products that support Israel, which is, for example, Shireen, where's Shireen? Raise your hand if you're still around. There she is. She was at DePaul and did an awesome campaign at her university's campus, which was to stop selling Sabra hummus. Coincidentally, Sabra is the name of a refugee camp that was destroyed, and there was a huge massacre in Lebanon. This is an Israeli product, and they support the IDF. Multiple things, and you can go online to find out more about the BDS movement. What are the products you can boycott? What are the things you can do to participate? And you can support your local campuses who are currently trying to divest. A lot of universities are currently trying to ask their campus to divest their assets from things that support the military in Palestine.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. Go ahead.
Well, so it's more of a comment, I guess, on something that I just heard said about sort of challenging our investment in sort of the war and the violence that's going on with Israel and Palestine. And I guess I'm just seeing it in broader terms than even just the money. We need to shatter the cultural myths that surround these issues.
Absolutely.
Like, the idea of an Israel that is constantly under attack and has to do these things just to survive, that is a really, pervasive cultural myth. And, we don't have to sit still for that. We don't just have to react to money and react directly to violence. We need to constantly be tearing at these myths. Like the myth of our own military is some sort of wholesome institution that, I think there was this idea that came out at some point, this whole we're not against the soldiers, we're against the war. That's all well and good, but pretending that this ugly, awful thing is built of all wholesome parts isn't helping anyone.
Absolutely.
It's like at some point we have to be willing to call things what they are in order to dismantle them.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the first biggest step that any of us can take, is to say, I reject this myth. I reject this imagery. The Marine Corps this week tweeted out a quote from Martin Luther King, something to the effect of, a man who's not willing to die for a cause doesn't deserve to live. This is the man who said that our government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And yet it's, his legacy is being manipulated in that way. These are the things we can rage against every single day.
Yeah. To go along with what you're saying about myth, there's also the pervasive myth around Palestine that it's like a Muslim versus Jewish conflict. There's a religious context in terms of propaganda and used to perpetuate violence in the region. But this is not Muslims versus Jews. This is not some type of terrible movie like Rocky or whatever. This is an occupying force for gain of profits, taking over people who are Muslims, Jews, atheists, Christians. There are priests against occupation that live in Palestine, that are Palestinian, that are not allowed to go to their churches. They've bombed, the Israeli army has bombed the Church of Nativity. Like, it's not an anti-Muslim thing. It's not an anti-Jewish thing. It's not a versus thing. It's a very simple colonial project. It's imperialism. It looks the same in Iraq. It looks the same in the Philippines. It looked the same all across the world. It's all very similar. And I guess that's really why we're here today, is to make sure that we know that the machine that is pushing people out of their homes and evicting people, and the sheriffs that come storming into her house with their guns drawn are the same people behind bulldozers, are the same people arresting Muslim, the 10-year-old boy, are the same people, and that is all.
That is actually a wonderful way to actually end tonight's event. Thank you for tying in both realities. Thank you again to all our storytellers. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Good evening.